translation of what you were saying. So I'm not sure if I'm on the wrong channel or something, but I actually couldn't hear what you were actually saying.
Ok. Chakra, ¿qué le puedes, Jajam Abraham, ¿le puede por favor explicar a Dassi cómo hacer para escuchar el canal en inglés?
I can't hear.
Es que no lo oímos nosotros. ¿Cómo hacemos eso?
Dassi, can you see like a sign of the world down in the? There's like interpretation.
Yes, I can see. It says language interpretation. I can see that.
So you can.
And I've ticked English, but.
Or Spanish. No, you need to push Spanish.
Okay.
You choose English. You choose English, and that's it. Okay. Now you're not gonna hear me. I'm gonna speak in the Spanish channel. You're not gonna hear me. Okay. So just start going.
Okay. So what did you want me to start with? I didn't hear what I'm supposed to be starting with.
You didn't hear it. No, just start with sharing with us whatever you have to share.
Okay. So I've prepared something just to share about my story and how we got to this place where I am today. So I began speaking about this journey of sexual abuse 4 years ago, and I never imagined that this is where I would end up today, and how big my voice would be and how big the voice of other survivors would become. So as I sat down to prepare to think about what I wanted to say today, I looked back at the first speech that I ever gave 4 years ago. And the speech that I gave 4 years ago was the first time that I had stood out publicly and told my story. So I went back to that speech, which I had somewhere on my computer, and I took a look at that speech. And I'm going to read you how I started off telling my story 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, when I told my story for the first time, I said, this is how I started my speech. I said, last week, my 6-year-old daughter, Leia, asked me, Emma, what is your story? She knows that I've been on radio, she's seen my pictures in the magazine, and now that she can read, she knows that I can't hide that. When she asks what's this all about, I tell her, Leia, it's my story. I've been sharing my story. So she says to me, Emma, what is your story? And my response is, how do you explain to a 6-year-old that you desperately want to move forward in your life and create a better story, while at the same time, you're determined to ensure that justice is pursued, not only for yourself, but for others that you know that are still suffering? There is no way to explain that to a 6-year-old. And I know one day that my daughter will read my story. And by that time, I want there to be a better story, a story of justice, of healing, of moving forward and creating a life for her. My daughter's 10 years old now. And while I was sitting down thinking about what I was going to say today, I read that little piece to her. And I said to her, when I started this journey, I was, you were 6 years old, you're 10 years old now. And she told me that she doesn't remember a time when I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, where I wasn't standing up, where I wasn't trying to have a voice. She doesn't remember a time when I wasn't trying to change the conversation around abuse. And this has been a part of my story for as long as she remembers. And now this is a part of her story too. My daughter is 10, so she doesn't know everything yet. And I'm still trying to protect her from as much of the ugly in this world as I can. But she knows that, when strangers stop us in the street and say hello, she knows why they're stopping us and why they, want to give me a hug or tell me I'm doing the right thing. My daughter doesn't remember a time when I didn't know how to speak out, when I didn't dare to think that I had a voice. She doesn't know that when my childhood trauma meant that I was very shy and submissive when I was younger. And she doesn't know that Malkhalifa used that to abuse me. My daughter only knows me now as the mother that is trying to create change. I want to go back to when my daughter was 1 year old. This was quite a difficult time for me. We're talking about 9 years ago now. And I was standing at the edge of a train platform thinking about jumping. I was actively suicidal and I was thinking about taking my own life. And I remember that moment, 9 years on, I remember that moment, that feeling of total powerlessness to stop the trajectory of trauma in my life. At the time, I was 24 years old. And in the space of the 2 years prior to that moment of standing at the edge of the police station platform, sorry, the train station platform, I had given birth to my daughter. And that was after years of infertility. And I had this idea that once my daughter was born and I became the Jewish mother that I was always supposed to be, that I was told the only thing that I was ever supposed to be, I thought that suddenly my life would be perfect, and all of that trauma that I had experienced beforehand with my parents and Leifa would just somehow magically be locked away in the back of my mind. But when my daughter was 7 months old, I ended up in a psychiatric hospital. And that was the first of 3 admissions to a psychiatric hospital. It was a mother and baby unit, and I was there with my daughter. And I was learning how to bond with my daughter. In that psychiatric hospital, it was the first time that I actually met people that were outside of the community I grew up with. So it was the first time that I was meeting people that weren't Jewish. It was the first time that I was meeting anyone that I hadn't grown up with. And I realized that, I mean, all my life I'd been taught that everyone outside the community were drug addicts and alcoholics and lowlifes. And I realized while I was in hospital that every mother that was there with their baby was struggling that same fight that I was struggling, that they were there just to try and be the best parent that they could be for their children. And that made me start to question everything that I had been taught. You know, if something so fundamental had been, you know, I'd been taught the wrong thing about the world outside of my community, then what else had I been taught that was wrong? During that hospitalization, I also was able to gain the courage to give my police statement. My sister had given her police statement about Malka Leifa, and we're talking about this is in 2011. I gave my police statement as well. At the same time, so it was a time of a lot of change, I also separated from my husband, and I realized that by giving my police statement, that would be seen as an act of betrayal in the community I came from. The idea that I would stand up and not be silent was seen as an act of betrayal, and that one day, if my daughter grew up in that community, she would be facing the punishment of my refusal to remain silent. And I realized the idea of standing up and doing what was right, how can I live in a community where that is seen as the wrong thing? I couldn't, and how can I bring up my daughter in a place where that's seen as the wrong thing? So I left the community and basically everything and everyone I knew. And with my 1-year-old daughter, and that, I mean, that's a story for a different time. That was a whole journey in of itself. But that was the beginning of my journey of making the choice to choose myself and my daughter. So if we go back to that train station where I was standing at the edge of that train platform and thinking about jumping, the thing that held me back from taking my life at that moment was knowing that I couldn't do that to my daughter, that I needed to make a decision to stop that cycle of intergenerational abuse, and it needed to stop, that I needed to do the work to stop that. And I remember sitting at the edge of that train platform. It was, you know, after the morning rush had kind of disappeared, everyone had gone off. And I sat down on the platform and I thought to myself, this is the time that I need to make a decision about where my life is going to go. And I need to get up and I need to fight to be a part of my child's life. I think the thing that the immediate trigger to me standing at the edge of that platform was that when I had left the community, my ex-husband decided that he was going to ensure that I had no part in my child's life. He didn't want my child to grow up outside of that community. And we had started a custody case in family court, and he was claiming that my mental health meant that I couldn't be a good mother. And so I was given supervised visitation by the judge, which meant that I wasn't able to actually be with my daughter unless I was supervised by someone else. So the idea of I had possibly 6 or 7 hours per week with my daughter until I could prove to the court that I was well enough. 6 or 7 hours in my sister's home where I'm surrounded by other children that I can't really bond with my daughter. And I remember thinking at that train station, Dassi, this is the point that you decide your future. I said to myself, you know, I could feel sorry for myself, I can give up. It felt like the system was punishing me, and the circumstances were beyond my control. I thought I can just go back to the psychiatric hospital. I can show my ex's husband and his parents that that I'm the worthless mother that they think that I am. Or I can get up and I can fight and I can choose to do the work, and I can take the help that was being offered to me and prove that I wasn't broken, that I could be the mother that I always wanted to be. And so I did. I mean, at first that choice was made for my daughter, because I didn't think that I deserved to do that for myself. But after a while, I realized that I was worthy of doing it for me. It wasn't an easy choice. I mean, I had to do a lot of therapy. I had to find my own voice and let it grow. I was taking antidepressants. I was trying to learn to let go of those things that I knew I couldn't control, and realized that I could only do the best in that moment with the resources that I had in that moment. And I went back to court, and the judge noticed those changes in me, and I was given more time with my daughter, and eventually I was granted primary custody of my daughter several years later. But that journey was a lot of hard work, and it still is hard work. It's something that I'll always be working on. It's not something that I'll always be self-monitoring. A lifetime of trauma means that I'll always be trying to understand my internal processes and understand why I'm doing something, because I have to think very carefully the way I parent my daughter, that every action of mine has a reaction in her. And it's my responsibility to stop that cycle of intergenerational trauma. So when I first started this journey 4 years ago, and I started looking at information about, trauma, and I went online, I saw a lot of information about, what trauma does to you. And it was all very negative. It was, you have PTSD, and everything that was around trauma was very negative. And I realized when I started this journey that I really wanted to bring to light the idea of post-traumatic growth, because I think I've learned and I've grown a lot from this journey. And when someone looks at that information about how much trauma affects your life, it's very easy to get overwhelmed and think about that you're never going to get better. And it really puts you into that kind of victim mentality. Oh, I've been through this trauma, nothing's, I'm not going to be able to move forward. But actually, the statistics show that 20% of people who experience trauma do get post-traumatic stress disorder, but 80% of people also experience post-traumatic growth. And we don't hear enough about this. We need to hear about this more. There is hope and there is ability to get better. And this doesn't negate the trauma, but there's still days that I know that I can't get out of bed and face the world, but there's also days that I love my life. And I think we need to showcase that more. So in March 2017, my story was publicized for the first time with my name. I sued the school, and there was a civil case against the Dassi Israel school. And during the civil case, it was found out that the school actually had paid for Malka Leifer to leave Australia when the allegations came forward. And at the time, I wasn't named in the papers covered the story, but basically it was victim this and victim that and victim sue school. And I really felt that I wanted to reclaim my own story and change the narrative. I wasn't a victim, I was a survivor. So I came out and I started a Facebook page called Dassi Erlich Beyond the Survivor, because my story is more than just a story of survival. And I wanted to change that narrative because one day I knew my daughter would read it. And I got a very surprisingly overwhelming positive response. And I decided to start the Bring Leifer Back campaign. At the time, Malka Leifer was still living a free life. She had managed to convince the courts that she was mentally unwell and she was out on bail. And it looked like the case was dead in the water, like she would live like that and that we would never see justice. Of course, it's very different now, but that's where it was back in 2017 when I first began speaking about the Bring Leifer Back campaign. I think that sexual abuse really thrives in secrecy, and I had been silent for long enough. It wasn't an easy decision. For so long, I believed that in order to move away from being a victim, I needed to just separate myself from my past and try and separate myself as much as possible. But over the last few years of doing this campaign, I realized that it's not so black and white. Before I shared my story, I was worried that if I labeled myself as a survivor, that the society would always see me as a victim. I wanted to speak out and create change, and not only with the Leifer case, but a broader societal change. And I'm lucky that I have been a part, and privileged that I have been a part of that change. My motives for speaking out has been questioned many times, and throughout the years, I've often wondered, is there another way to encourage change? And why does society continually put the onus on the survivor to make the change? When will the community itself do the heavy lifting and actually make the systemic changes that we need? And society has moved in that direction, but it's not moving fast enough. We need it to move faster. It has been a rocky road, and we have people that don't want us to change. We have had people yell and scream at us over time, but for every person that has yelled and screamed at us, there has been 10 more that have supported and stood with us. So actually tonight, Melbourne time, we have another court hearing for Malka Leifer. It's the 74th court hearing. This is her second to last appeal. There is one more possible appeal. The Justice Minister needs to sign off the extradition order, but that is it's in rare cases that can be appealed. But once we hear a decision from tonight, if the extradition order is upheld, if the district court's extradition order is upheld and the Supreme Court grant the extradition, the Justice Minister signs off and Malka Leifer has to be back in Australia within 60 days. So she could be back here early next year, but it's hard to believe when I started this journey that didn't seem possible, and this is where we are now. So that's pretty much wraps up where we are at the moment.
Dassi, thank you very much. So if we can go with the questions now. So now I just want to say something in Spanish, if it's okay with you. I don't know if you can maybe with the translation or no. Okay, if no, it's okay. So I'm just taking one second. Bueno, además de agradecerles a todos que están aquí, quiero decirles que para mí conocer a Dassi fue igual que como lo es para ustedes ahorita, en la distancia. Y paralelamente, cuando entré a trabajar a Colbecoag, la conocí gracias a Mani, gracias a que Dani y muchos líderes de este sueño que es Colbecoag hoy se hizo realidad, voluntarios y líderes visionarios comprometidos por la causa. La verdad es que aún en la distancia y la diferencia de horarios con vidas absolutamente distintas y lejanas, conocerles, entender desde un primer mensaje su absoluto compromiso, su misión y su inmensa generosidad. Su compromiso por ayudar hasta los más remotos lugares del planeta. Tenerla aquí hoy con nosotros es ver otro sueño cumplido. Ella es una sobreviviente, sí, pero que más allá de sobrevivir, vive con el compromiso no solo de alzar la voz, sino de ser la voz de muchos otros que no han podido hacerlo. Sabemos todos que aquel que sufre abuso es herido profundamente, pero es aún más quien se atreve a hablar y es silenciado. Ella y sus hermanas han luchado más de 10 años con el temor, el silencio y la injusticia. Y no ha sido fácil, han sido años duros, de duro y difícil trabajo personal, de buscar arreglar circunstancias de su vida que podían haber sido mejores y sobrellevar lo que no se puede cambiar de la mejor manera. Ha sufrido, pero ha buscado la manera de moverse. Como digo, no sobreviviendo, sino buscando resignificar y vivir, siendo el héroe de su propia historia. Perdón, Dani, esa te la volé, pero me gustó. Encontró su voz y fuerza, y su lucha es la fuente de inspiración de muchos más para lograr encontrarla. Dassi, muchas gracias por contestar siempre, porque tu testimonio y lucha hacen de este mundo un lugar mejor y más seguro. Y como dijo mi papá al principio, todos tenemos familia, todos tenemos hijos por los cuales luchar y por los cuales querer que este mundo sea un lugar mejor. Entonces, gracias por todos los que están comprometidos con la causa y por seguir trabajando, y ojalá que como dijo Mili al principio, sea una cuestión de educación y pues que nadie más tenga que sufrir esta situación. Entonces vamos a pasar con las preguntas. Son 3, 4 preguntitas más. Y si quieren escribir preguntas aquí, el Jajam Abraham Cohen se las va a preguntar, o ya las pregunta también aquí el señor Jacobo Curson, que nos hizo el honor de hacer esta cuestión en inglés.
Hi, Dassi. I hear your story is shocking my mind. It's not so easy to compenetrate with your feelings. One of the questions that I have is, how important is for the victim to feel that the perpetrator is being punished? And why is so important to you?
I don't know where the translator went, but that's a good question in English. Is the translator still around?
Sorry, yeah, I'm around, but I'm in the Spanish channel. I'm gonna speak in Spanish. You hear the questions in English, and I'll speak in Spanish.
Para ti, después de tu historia, que siendo una víctima, qué importante tiene en ti que el que te hizo daño sea castigado. ¿Y por qué es tan importante? That's in Spanish.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so this is a really good question. And I think the idea of the perpetrator being punished, and for me personally, I don't think that, you know, life of being punished has ever been my goal. The idea that she can't hurt anyone else has always been my goal. I don't see her going to jail as punishment. I see her going to jail as she doesn't have the ability to hurt anybody else. But it's a much broader concept than that. It's the idea of punishing a perpetrator means that society values child safety. It's seeing that society cares what happens to children and putting the value on making sure that we don't allow those perpetrators to hurt anybody else. It's about accountability, and it's about making that statement that it's not okay to hurt children. I mean, the mechanics of the legal system are a two-edged sword. I mean, on one hand, you know, everything about it tells the survivor that what happened to them wasn't okay, and that their life has value, and that the abuse they suffered wasn't right. But at the same time, it's a horrible process for the survivor to go through. And sometimes, and I've heard that survivors feel that they have faced more trauma going through the process than the actual abuse that they suffered. So it is a double-edged sword, but I think punishing the perpetrators really does make that statement of accountability. This is not right, what happened, and we are going to, as a society, make sure that those that hurt children are held accountable. And that's why it's important for perpetrators to be punished.
You're telling me the truth is you are right. No one can take from you what you have in your mind. It's not the same thing to be a victim than to live like a victim. How can we help survivors with this process? Not to be victimizing them all the time. How can you be a victim or a victimizer?
Yeah, so I think with this question, I mean, how do we make sure that when we're helping victims that we don't victimize them? I think that's the question.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to this, it starts with the language of how we talk to survivors. I mean, when we talk to survivors and we talk, you know, we use the word victim or we use the word survivor, that language is important. The way that we express things and the way that is how we talk to ourselves about those things. So we start even from the most basic things of calling people survivors instead of victims. it's also about, you know, making sure that the silence, silence does intensify victimization. So about a month or so ago in Victoria, a new law was passed. Victoria is where I live. A new law was passed where there was gag laws on survivors from telling their stories, which basically meant that myself and my sisters and anyone that had come out with their stories were under those gag laws as well. And we would need to apply to the court to tell our story. We had already been telling our story for years already, but we were suddenly silenced, and we would have to actually apply to court to make sure to ask that we were allowed to speak. And the process for me was, it was quite heart-wrenching, and it was triggering. I mean, here I had been talking about my story for years, and now I'm suddenly told that I don't have the right to share my own story. And I think when I gave I had to write an affidavit to prove to the court that I was mentally sound to tell my own story. And I remember speaking to the lawyer, and I said to him, why do I have to prove to the court that I'm mentally sound to share my own story? Every other victim of any other crime is allowed to share their story. You know, it doesn't matter how they feel about sharing their story. If they, you know, whatever they want, they're allowed to tell their story. Why do I have to prove to the court as a sexual abuse survivor that I'm mentally sound enough to tell my own story? That is adding to the taboo and the stigma around sexual abuse. That is adding to the silence around victim abuse. That's telling abuse survivors that they need to be in a certain frame of mind to share their own story, and only if the court agrees with them, then they are allowed to tell their own story. So because of our public voice, we were actually lucky enough to have the support to go through the court system, and we were heard very quickly, and we were able to share our story again. But it's an expensive process, and the laws I think are in the process of being changed back again because of the ruckus that we raised about how this felt to survivors. So I think part of helping survivors not victimize them is being heard, being validated, knowing that the shame is not on them, the shame is on the perpetrator, and removing that shame and that silence allows them to understand that the blame is not on them, and then they can look at what they can control in their life and what they can't control in their life, and move towards becoming a survivor, and moving towards seeing that if the blame and the shame is not on them, they can move towards other things in their life.
Dassi, someone has a question that if the 74 cases, other cases of Mal Khalifa's situation came out after you, or how it was that?
Okay, so the 74 charges of sexual abuse are from myself and my two sisters. So it's not 74 people, it's 74 charges of sexual abuse from sexual assault to rape. So those are how the 74 charges have come from my police statement, my two sisters' police statements. My younger sister Ellie gave her police statement first, I gave it second, and my older sister Nicole gave it third. And from those three police statements, that's where the 74 charges are drawn.
Dassi, I have another question. There is something that we can to know, to prevent, to be victims, to see stories like you. We have something to make prevention to the people and to start stories like the story that you now are talking about.
Yeah. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, it's about systemic change. But until that happens, I think when I look back at my story and I think about what could have helped me back then, I think about, first of all, having the language around abuse would have helped. I didn't know. I didn't have the language. I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't know that it was wrong. I just knew that it felt bad. But also, I think it's about when I had no safe people in my life. I couldn't talk to my parents. My parents weren't safe people. There was no one safe. And when people ask me, how can we ensure that, you know, our children are not abused? What can we do? I say there needs to, in a child's life, the communication and the relationship that you have with your child is going to be the best thing is really going to be the best thing for you to prevent your child, or if something happens, your child knows that they can come to you and speak to you about that. And it's having that communication, that open communication, that constant communication with your child, and having that relationship that they can come to you. That's really the best prevention in this day and age, I think, with knowing how to, if your child is being abused before it gets to the point that, you know, they're being severely abused.
Yeah, it's true. I read something about the Viktor Frankl, that the life must have a meaning. Did you think that the people that have lived like you, stories like you, we can help with a meaning of life? We can help them to have a meaning of what to do next?
Yeah, look, I mean, that it's a difficult question to answer because everyone has to find their own meaning in life. But I think, and I've heard this from a lot of survivors, that being a part of creating that change has given them meaning, and talking out. And I know that speaking out and having a voice and being heard has given me meaning. And when I hear other people come to me and say, you know, the fact that you spoke out allowed me to go to the police and share my story, that has given meaning to my life and has made me feel that I am doing something throughout this journey. I am doing something that is changing other people's lives. And that's not for everyone. It's not everyone can find meaning in giving back. Sometimes it's about finding meaning in realizing that you're important enough to, you know, to heal and to move forward. And that's a hard thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do, to actually really, you know, go internally and figure out what, you know, that your trauma, and look for ways to heal.
People that are asking us, the story that you tell is too many years, but how it began to happen? It's something that you can feel that it start to happen something wrong. You can feel it. The child can feel something.
Are you talking about when I was being abused? When did I realize that it was wrong? I'm not exactly sure what your question is.
Yes.
Yeah?
That's, yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, when I was actually being abused, I knew that what was happening wasn't right. I knew that that it was a secret. I mean, Malcolm told me not to say anything, or, you know, so I knew that it was wrong. But I was, by that time in my life, because of the trauma at home, I was so used to compartmentalizing and separating things in my life that it was easy to have a relationship with Malcolm and think, when she was abusing me, she was abusing me. And when she wasn't abusing me, she wasn't abusing me. And she was my principal. And that's the way that I related to her. And when she was actually abusing me, that's what was happening. And generally in those spaces, I disassociated. So I wasn't actually in the room being abused by her, but most of the time. But there was, I think, even when I got married, I didn't really understand that what had happened was wrong. It wasn't probably until I started talking to other people in the psychiatric hospital and realizing that there was a whole world outside of my community, and that there was language around that type of stuff, that I actually realized that what had happened was wrong. So it took me quite a while.
It's very strong. It's not so easy to live with a life like you, with the things that are you talking about. Now you can tell you are living a happy life. You can trust your kids in a place, in a school, with the principals. is the same thing if can happen in the religion, or is the same thing if it can happen everywhere?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's not about the fact that this abuse doesn't happen everywhere, but I think the way that communities respond to what happens is what changes the outcome.
It's supposed to be the most quick time. The terror can stop more fast. So you can tell me you are changing your life because you are a mother, or your life when it stopped having this abuse to you, you change your life, or only because I hear you that when you have your daughter, you start to thinking and changing. So it's different. Your life change because you are a mother, or your life changed from the beginning?
No, I would say that having my daughter was definitely the catalyst for me to realize that what had happened to me was wrong, because until that point, I'd been told that I was, I had been abused, so I didn't believe I had any worth. But when I had my daughter, I realized that in order to be the best parent to her, I needed to have some worth. And if I couldn't heal for myself because I didn't feel I deserved to heal for myself, then I needed to heal for her, because she deserved to have a mother that was healed. So I think that's where it started. That's where my journey started to heal myself. I mean, we're talking 10 years ago, but even when I was pregnant with her, but that over time I learned to heal for myself.
So you heal yourself by yourself. You need someone to help. It's very strong what you are talking about.
A ver,
Oh, no, I
bueno,
mean, I definitely had help. By healing myself, I mean, I went to therapy, and I did a lot of things that I realized that I needed to improve myself.
Yeah, right.
vamos a pasar a, bueno, si quieren tener unos minutos de preguntas, si quieren escribir alguna, vamos a empezar a leer algunos comentarios que mandaron, se le van a traducir a ella, entonces si quieres dile.
I'm going to change to the English channel. Voy a
It says the first thing that
you hear me in the English channel, okay?
the chat is definitely you are much more than a survivor. Thanks to fight for these facts. Thanks to be a sample and have the guts to do it. And it's not so easy that everybody can talk about that like you are doing now.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I think when I look back, and I've been told that before, not everyone's able to speak, and I think about the things that helped me survive my childhood, learning to separate my emotions from what's happening, and compartmentalizing and disassociating. Those are the things that have helped me now, and I've turned them around to help me now in my life, so that I'm able to speak about these things and do so in hopefully a healthier manner. But I've turned around those things that helped me survive my childhood to help me in my adulthood.
Yeah. Also, I have another question. You have a book that you write about that?
Yeah, so I'm writing a book at the moment. The book was due to be finished last month, but I've still got a while to go. I'm almost done. Talking about deadlines, I'm supposed to be writing right now, but I will get back to it. It probably won't, now that Malka Leifa is coming hopefully back to Australia early next year, the book actually won't be published now until after the trial.
They say, thank you very much, Dassi. I admire you. You are a great lesson for everybody that can hear your testimony. It's a lot of, now they say, is everything forgiven, or do we never forgive at all?
That's a tricky question, because I don't see things in the term of forgiveness. I think the thing that I've always worked on first is the self-blame and forgiving myself, because that's something that I think a lot of survivors struggle with, that self-blame of, you know, that's what the reason that I got abused was because there was something wrong with me, or there's something wrong that I did, or I should have stopped it. And I think that's where forgiveness comes in, learning to forgive myself for feeling like I was to blame for what happened. And that's where, if there's anything about forgiveness in this whole story, that's where for me it is. I haven't even thought about forgiveness for any of the people that have abused me. That's not something that I've even thought about.
Right. What happened with your fathers when they know about that?
So my parents, I don't have any contact with my parents. My parents disowned all of their children about 12 years ago, because of other reasons, not because of what happened with the life stuff, and not because of leaving the community. They were just abusive parents, and at some point they decided that they didn't have children anymore, and they didn't want children anymore, so they just decided to disown all of their children. But since then, my father has actually passed away about a year ago.
Wow. And another question is, can you recommend something to the young people?
The young people that are going through the abuse, I mean, the thing that when I speak to young people that have reached out to me, I think the thing that I try the most is to reassure them that they are not to blame. That's really the thing that I spend a lot of time, because the self-blame is so strong, and the shame and the silence. And I try as much as possible to move the shame from them to the perpetrator. It's not their fault. And I think that the reassurance, it needs to be constant. It needs to be, you know, it needs to be something that is constantly reassured.
When the people that not sure that you are right, what you do? How can you live with that?
Sorry, what was the question?
The question is, somebody says, I admire you, I respect you, but I have a question. How you can front the people that doesn't believe what are you talking about?
Okay, and we've had many of those types of people. I've had rabbis screaming on the phone to me that, you know, that I'm doing the wrong thing, and that I'm lying, and that I must be doing this for the money, and I ask them what money, because there's no money in this. So look, at the end of the day, I don't feel very affected by that. I understand that that's a problem. I wish that it was different. I've sat down with rabbis and tried to explain to them why I'm doing this, and why, you know, and why they need to be a part of this change. Unfortunately, it's not something that I've had much success with. But really the thing that I focus on is like the hundreds and thousands of people that support us and have stood with us. That's the thing that I choose to focus my energy on, not the people that yell and scream about how I'm doing the wrong thing. There's always going to be that people are uncomfortable with change, but it's much easier to focus on those that, you know, support us.
I see. I have another question now. That when you have been abused, you tell to somebody?
When I was being abused?
Right. When you was a kid?
No, there was no one to talk to. There was no one for me to talk to.
Because you were afraid?
No, I didn't have parents to talk to. I didn't have any relatives in the community. The principal of my school, the person that I told about the abuse that was happening at home, was also abusing me. And so I didn't have anyone I could actually speak to. And besides, even if I did have someone to speak to, which I didn't, I had no language for what was happening to me. There was no words around what was happening to me. I couldn't explain to you at the time what was happening to me because there was no language around it.
It's very strong. Even with your sisters, nobody?
My sisters were being abused as well. And there was at one point when I recognized that I recognized from the behaviors that my sisters were being abused, but we didn't even talk about it to each other. There was this understanding between us, but again, there was no language. We didn't have the words to talk about what was happening. So there was this understanding, but that was it.
Hi, Dassi. It's a strong story. No words. You leave me speechless. I don't have from the moment. What can I say? Is speechless. It's very strong stories. I hope that nobody can leave that things that it happened to you, and that's called Kobekoa.
Yeah,
We must
exactly.
be careful.
It's, just knowing that an organization like Kolbakok exists is enough for children to know that there are people there that are looking out for them and want to stop what is happening to them, even if they can't talk out for themselves and they can't advocate for themselves. Knowing that an organization that exists like Kolbakok means that that they have someone to reach out to when they're ready.
So it's supposed to be that inside the family, not in the school, the family can help a lot when the child is in that situation.
I think if there's someone safe in the family, if there's a safe person in the family, I think that's the strongest prevention for abuse.
To have the safer person in the family.
Yeah.
I think so. Dassi is speechless. I'm not really crying when I speak, but you make my sense very, very strong. What do you think that's gonna be the next step to have punished the people that make you suffer so long?
Did you say to punish?
To punish them. You think that they need to be something else, or he just get out and it stop and we can do anything?
No, I think that people that have covered up abuse should be held accountable, because that's the only way that we can change. I mean, change is a systemic problem that starts, from when we're very little, to understand that behavior should never happen. But those that cover up abuse, and those that, even those that help Malka Leifer to leave the country, they should face charges, because that holds them accountable for their actions and makes them realize that what they did was wrong. I mean, sending Malka Leifer to another country where she can just abuse other people, and it's alleged that she did once she left Australia. I mean, how is that fixing a problem? And there are still people within the community I came from that think that they did the right thing. And they need to be held accountable. They didn't do the right thing, and that should never be the answer, to send the problem somewhere else.
Right. Sometimes they like it to close the eyes and doesn't believe anything. Is strong to be in the position of the victim or the punisher. Is very strong.
Yeah.
Dassi, thank you very much. As I said at the beginning, this to me is like a dream come true. Kolbekoa is a dream come true, and having you here and your voice that give strong to many people, I appreciate it a lot. And one more time in Spanish, gracias. La verdad no hay palabras para agradecer que
Thank you,
Kolbekoa.
Dassi. I don't have words to say thank you to Kolbekoa with people like you, with education. you can prevent. Thank you, Esther,
Yo, perdón que la mencione, pero antes que nada por creer en mí,
because she believed in me
echarme porras.
and helping me.
Por acompañarnos.
And thank you for being. You can follow Dassi on the Instagram and Facebook. Thank you for my father, that he was a good plan B. And thank you for Danny and Pepe, that they're a good teamwork and good friends.
They will meet in person when
Why
all this
not?
COVID stuff is over.
I hope in Australia.
Well,
Pepe,
let me know
¿quieres
when you.
decir algo también?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. It was nice to meet all of you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you very, very much. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. I'm a grandfather and I need to take care about all my family, and not only my family. I have a lot of friends and I have a lot of contact with the people that sometimes they can have troubles and they don't make anything. So we must make changes in this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Nice to
Okay.
meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dassi.
Bye.
Thank you very
Bye,
much.
Dassi.
Bye a todos.
Thank you,
Gracias.
everybody.
Gracias, Alice. Gracias al Jajam Abraham y gracias, Pepe, todos. Muchas gracias por estar.
Gracias a todas, gracias Karen, gracias Abraham, gracias.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.